afternoon, everyone. Welcome to AI Would Agree. And my first show, carrying COVID, I'm going to get it out in the open so everybody knows. If you want to switch off now so you don't catch it, honestly, it's not an internet virus, as Craig pointed out. Like it doesn't travel down the microphone. You're all right, promise. But yeah, I'm still here. I couldn't let the audience down. I know how much you all enjoy the show. Uh, so my guest today is a man who needs very little introduction, as ever with any of my guests. Craig Fearn, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Good to be here.
Good to have you along. For the audience that's watching the show, the reason I've chosen to speak with Craig on the show is, first of all, because a lot of what Craig talks about is very close to my heart. Having been through mental health issues myself in the past, to a lesser or greater extent, a lot of what Craig talks about is very good common sense, makes a lot of good business practice, and I'm sure Craig helps a lot of good people along the way as he goes along. For me, there's been a lot of conversation over recent months about identifying vulnerable customers, specifically within the contact center space. And part of the reason I got into talking with Craig in the first place was it was a random networking session, even though he pretty much works in the same industry as me. Um, but the thing that drew me to Craig's mission is that I've for a while now had a big bugbear about there's so much focus put onto that section of supporting customers, which is good. That's great, and it should be there. But what about the agents? Because if we're looking at 54% of the UK adult population being classed as potentially vulnerable, according to the FCA, and that was some time ago. Let's be honest, that's likely to have risen quite considerably, I would think, in the meantime. Who's looking after the agents, and how are they looking after the agents? And I am, to be fair, starting to see a lot more conversations around the topic now, and a lot more people kind of coming to the front and recognizing that it's something that needs discussing. But that's where Craig comes into the conversation. I'll not steal your thunder, Craig, but it would be great to hear a little bit about how you got where you are now, and what your mission is.
Yeah, sure. So, I, like most people who end up where they are, didn't actually intend to get there at all. My ambition when I was a youngster was to be an astronaut, and
Yeah,
I know that was it. That's all I ever wanted to be, was an astronaut. And unfortunately, I missed out. I clearly failed a few medical tests. But I the main medical test I would have failed would have been that I actually suffer from mental ill health personally. So I suffered from mental ill health since about the age of 12. I was unfortunate enough to go to a private school. I was 45 on Monday this week. So thank you. I was of the age where mental health wasn't a thing, and that effectively you needed to suck it up, get back in there, and sort of put your bum back on the seat, do the exam. And the poor guy in front of me that I used to vomit on because I was too anxious, uh, wasn't overly impressed. It kind of got to the stage where people were actually reading down, because we were all sat alphabetically. People were reading down the alphabet to see which one was sat in front of me during the exam. Yeah, it really was a sort of thing. And I would go at the back, and the person that was invigilating the exam would sort of come along and say, no, you've got to go back in, because if you don't go back, you get nothing. Well, I can assure you, you also get nothing when you go back in, vomit, and can't actually write on a piece of paper. So I came out with very little in the way of qualifications, didn't really know where I was going, what I was doing. Fell into the world of call centers, where I think I probably worked in one of the first outbound sales call centers in the country, which was based in Cornwall, and partnered with Raleigh in Manchester for a company called the Money Group. And I worked there for a little while before I moved out of mortgages and call centers and went into sort of the proper world of finance, where I came down with a condition called chronic cluster headache, and started having time to offer brain scans and things like that. But I was given an amazing choice by my employers at the time, which was, choice number one: you couldn't quit, Or choice number two, we're going to manage you out on ill health, which, you can imagine probably wasn't the thing some wanted to hear while they were running around somebody trying to find what was wrong with their brain. Um, I sort of, so I decided to leave under my own steam, rightly or wrongly, because I thought it was the best thing to do. I ended up basically going into my own lockdown for about 18 months. So COVID really wasn't a problem for me. I was kind of used to the time in isolation. I didn't have my mates around. If they did come round, I'd pass them tea through the window. So they didn't get to see me. I think I went up to about 24 stone in weight. My best mate became the pizza delivery guy who I never actually really met. I just used to put the money in an envelope and stick it in the door, and he'd come along and leave me a pizza. And things weren't looking too bright. I was giving NHS counselling. And I remember turning up to my very first counselling session, and the guy sort of going, "So, you're right." And it's like, "Well, no, it's kind of why I'm here." We sort of sat down, and he gave me some things to do, and he said, "Right, go away and do this." So I went away, did it, came back the next week. He's like, "Right, everything fixed." No, it's only been a week. All right, we'll go away and do them again. So we did this for 5 weeks, and 5 weeks of me coming back and saying no. And at the end of the 5th week, he goes, "Well, that's the end of your 5 weeks that you get on the NHS. Thanks for coming." And it's like, "But I've just unpacked all my shit all over the floor. And now you're telling me I'm off." Okay. So I left, and I left with the attitude now that not even the NHS could fix me. I was beyond help. And I attempted suicide. I attempted suicide for the first time, and wasn't successful. So I thought I'd try again, see if I could do it any better the second time. Fortunately, I wasn't successful then either. And it sort of, I came to this sort of place where I was like, you know what? If I'm not actually very good at suicide, maybe I should be doing something different. Maybe I should be looking at this in a different way. So I did, and I started sort of celebrating the half step, not even the step, the half step forward. And I demanded more counselling, but I went back to counselling with the attitude I was going to keep what I wanted, and I was going to bin the rest. And I was actually going to go and find other stuff that would allow me to build my own toolkit. It was just for this. So it wasn't going to be a sort of a one size fits all solution. It was going to be something that I could use in life for me to keep going. And I got to such a stage where I was like, okay, yeah, this is starting to work. I better stress test it. As we do, we need to find out if these things are really working. So I decided I'd do something really easy and hardly stressful at all, and go to university, which, clearly is highly recommended for those who don't like stress. And I went to university as a man who was, shall we say, above the average age of the other students, who had both a physical and a mental impairment. And, universities at the time weren't set up for this. They were very rigid. This is the way things were. They'd always been this way. And it was a really interesting 3 years of challenging, more challenging, and even more challenging. But in the end, I qualified. I got my degree. And then I decided that actually that wasn't enough, and I wanted some more. So I went and got a master's degree. And then I got a master's level teaching degree, and sort of took over running the course that I'd graduated from. But even that wasn't doing it for me. I enjoyed the teaching for a bit, but decided, what I'm really enjoying is the pastoral care. It's the actual getting hold of people and working out ways of dealing with things. I'm based in Cornwall, and we are a very high area of deprivation down here. And an awful lot of the sort of students I was interacting all came from non-standard educational backgrounds. So they were single mothers who had had children early. They were parents who had been told their whole lives they'd never amount to anything, so why bother taking a degree? Those that had been forced into work early because of family situations, all sorts of things like that. And, the bit I really enjoyed was actually working out how we could keep them there, how we could work past the issues, the problems, and sort of and keep going. I remember coming home one day and speaking to my wife now, she wasn't back then, and sort of saying, this incredible job that I've worked all this time for, and, I get a decent wage and a pension and all that, and your gran even knows what I do. Because you've made it if your gran understands your job. That's how I sort of gauge my work positions. If my gran gets them, then they're relatively good. Um, and she was like, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, I'm going to jack it all in, and I'm going to go self-employed." And then started the longest 12 hours of my life. Well, we had a very interesting conversation on exactly what size my brain had shrunk to that day. And we kind of reached the next morning, and I think generally due to lack of sleep, she gave in. And I decided, you know what, I'm gonna quit. So I went in, I quit, and I started my own business, Lighthouse Mentoring. Now, Lighthouse Mentoring was a business that I started to help support university level students. So the sort of demographic that is just coming into university, 18, 19, first job type people, first places that they were going. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Paid for by the government, which means you've got to jump through enough hoops to make you dizzy. But it was a really, really rewarding job. And I did that quite happily for a while until I was contacted by the company who'd employed a graduate that I'd worked with. And they said, "Look, we've got so and so here. He worked with you while he was a student. He's told us about what you do. Do you think you could do it for our staff?" And I was like, "Well, how much?" No, clearly what I said was, um, "It's going to take a bit of thinking through because it's slightly different, but I'm sure there's a way that we can make this work." So we did. And about 2 years later, after doing that and picking up a few other businesses, the same business came back and said, "Okay, we're doing this, but actually we'd much rather have some way of doing something that's more sustainable, so we don't have to continue to sort of react to situations. We want to be more proactive. How can we be more proactive?" So I said, "Okay, fine." So I sat down and basically I worked out my own 17-point plan on how you can make your workplace more well-being friendly and actually change the culture of the workplace in itself. Um, and started doing that. Recently, I was approached by the Institute of Directors and asked to become their wellbeing ambassador, which I was quite pleased about. I still sit on the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, doing bits and bobs with them. And my work now takes me to all different corners of the planet. Unfortunately, not in person. This computer stuff's got a lot to answer for. But as I was saying to Paul, this week I've spoken to Alaska, and I've spoken to Tel Aviv, and I've spoken to Samoa. Incredible, incredible places with people doing incredible things, all about something that I'm really passionate in. And that's sort of a very abridged version of my life. Yeah.
It's an inspiring story, Craig. And actually, it's quite surprising that I've not actually heard that story before. Because when we were talking before, we were probably talking more business terms than we were talking about personal life stories. So, like, from my point of view, I can imagine that's a really originally would have been a really hard story to tell, and I can imagine to a certain extent it still is. But the difference that you must make to people's lives as a result of telling it, obviously, make it worthwhile.
I think that's the big thing, ultimately, again, Men's Health Week and men's mental health and sort of thing. It's mental health doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you're fat, thin, old, young, white, black, male, female. It is one of those things that, but the sort of I suppose one of the sort of stereotypes is that, people who run businesses or are relatively successful or, you know, they're bulletproof. And nothing could be further from the truth. The bit is that we look at our businesses and we look at sort of what we can do to sort of look after our staff. Um, because the staff are the productivity hive of what we're doing. But in actuality, I was watching a program on billionaires and billionaire mindsets a little while ago, and what was identified to me was exactly how lonely these individuals are, and how paranoid they are, and how they believe the whole world is just interested in them because of their money, and they can't actually make any friends because the friends they make, they believe are after something. And the fact that they're followed by security guards everywhere because someone might kidnap one of them and get their um, and then I sort of balance that with some of the work I do with sort of CEOs and sort of directors, where you say to the director, "Oh, you've got this plan in place for your employee benefits scheme, and it's got a telephone number. Have you ever used it?" No. Why not? Well, because if anyone got to hear that I was accessing this sort of stuff, then it'd be blood in the water, and people would think that I was weak and there was a problem. And it's like, well, no, actually they wouldn't. But that's the perception. The perception seems to be at the top as well as the bottom. But for some reason, we divorce the workforce from the management chain and say, no, 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 this is only at this end that people start getting these issues, or only at this end that people start getting these issues. So, yeah, it's opened a lot of conversations for me. And I think one of the reasons for that is I firmly believe in an empathetic approach to anything I deal with. Now, you and I may not suffer in exactly the same way from exactly the same condition, but I have an understanding of what these things are going to be like, and never am I going to turn around and ask you how it made you feel, which is one of my biggest bugbears. Or the well-meaning friend who really is trying hard, but goes, I can't imagine how far it must be awful being you. And it's like, yeah, bloody right. It is. Thanks very much for reminding. Um,
Alignment.
yeah, yes. So it's sort of that position, that stance of empathy, and where people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And it's that sort of I love that phrase, because in actuality I've got qualifications, I've got experience, I've done this and I've done that. But actually nobody really wants to know me until they realise that I give a damn about them and their business and the people who work for them. Because if not, I'm just another bod in the same space who picked up a book yesterday or whatever the case might be. So yeah, it's a blessing and a curse. It's look, I still suffer from mental health now. I still have days where I hide under the duvet, pretend the world needs to go away, or I ring my wife and say, "You've got to take my son to school," because I just can't face it. But for me, that makes me better at what I do, not weaker at what I do. It makes me better because I'm genuine, I'm authentic, I'm a person that lives this life. I live, I breathe it, I eat it, I sleep it.
Yeah.
I'm not just somebody that picks it up between 9 and 5 and then puts it down and then doesn't care and then comes back to it again the next day, sort of thing. But don't get me wrong, there's got to be that break, or else you can't carry these things with you totally, or else you would fall apart. But if you manage these things correctly, and this is something over time that I've managed to get better at, and it's something that I teach other people how to do, then you can live a perfectly productive life while operating with some form of mental ill health.
So, I guess for a lot of businesses out there who are watching this, a lot of the standard reaction to mental health concerns is that it's a problem that the employee needs to solve, right? Whatever the level that employee is at, it's their problem to fix. Is that
Yeah.
something that you bump against a lot?
So basically, I was campaigning on behalf of mental well-being way before it was cool. I was the guy who was knocking on the door and getting chased away by the dogs. Go away, you crazy man. Mental well-being, that's not a thing. Um, for me, I split these things down into two very distinct camps to a certain extent. So I practice and advocate for what I call strategic well-being. The other side of that is the idea of initiative-based well-being. Now, strategic well-being is one of these where we sort of sit down, we work out where you are, we work out where you want to go, we work out how you're going to get there, and we plug in the right bits to get you there, and then we monitor it right the way through until you get to where you need to go. Now, that requires the business to take responsibility for being part of the solution. On the other side of the equation is what I would refer to as initiative-based well-being. Now, well-being initiatives are amazing things. Anything that increases understanding of well-being or increases tools for people to be able to improve their well-being, I will never ever put down in any way. But when we have sort of, for example, someone sort of comes in and says, "Okay, we're gonna put a course on resilience this week." Brilliant course on resilience, great stuff. Why do you need a course on resilience? Well, staff are going off sick. Okay, why are they going off sick? Well, because they're stressed. Why are they stressed? Well, we've got them working 3 shifts in a row. Well, you don't need a resilience course, because a resilience course is about teaching these people how to be better able to deal with the unreasonable workload that you're giving them in the first place. It's completely counterintuitive. Also, if you put the resilience course out, what are you going to do next week? How are you going to reinforce that learning? How are you going to make sure that people have actually understood the message that you've wanted them to get from that learning? You get somebody in to show you some mindfulness, absolutely brilliant. Some ability to sort of take control and take back some of your own personal time. That happens on week 3. What's going on week 9? Where's week 10? What's week 12? Or are we going to keep coming back to that one mindfulness session and saying, hang on a minute, gang, we taught you how to be mindful. Everything else is your fault.
Yeah.
And the amount of business that sort of have a very sort of tick box attitude to, we gave you this course, we taught you to be mindful, and we gave you a resilience package, because those are all the trendy things that are around in wellbeing at the moment. Why have you still got a problem? Well, the problem is that it doesn't matter how much of this stuff you give people, if the business culture is broken, you're putting a band-aid over a broken leg. It's never going to do the job. I said to a company the other day, "What do you do for your well-being?" They said, "Oh, we give our staff ice cream on a Friday." Yeah, brilliant. Ice cream on a Friday. What do you do on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday? Oh, well, that's to deal with our mental health first aiders. I was like, okay, mental health first aid, great awareness course, 2 days. What can they do with that course? Well, they can't practice, they can't give advice, all they can do is listen and refer. And not only that, how are you supporting them? What do you mean supporting them? Well, where are they putting their stuff? They're listening to everybody else's stuff. Where are they going to put their own stuff and the stuff that they're listening to for everyone else's? Because remember, you're not employing them as mental health because you're employing them as a job, and then they're doing this listening.
Yep.
And we're doing nothing with them. Personally, I have to have supervision on a monthly basis. So I have somewhere to offload because of the amount of stuff I listen to. But what beggars belief is that we put this type of responsibility on somebody, and these people are well-meaning individuals. They want to be part of the solution, but actually we put them in a position where they just listen to this stuff over and over and over and over again. They can signpost people and point them in the right direction and say, "Why don't you ring these people? Have you thought about going to those people?" But that's as far as they can go. But they become the backbone of the business's sort of mental well-being structure. So, for me, these are all initiatives. They all work brilliantly if part of a wider strategy. But if they're not part of a strategy and they're just one-off things, in the end, they end up collapsing in on themselves like a house of cards, because X doesn't know what Y's doing. Y hasn't got a clue. And ultimately, we end up spending twice as much money as a business just filling in sandpaper in holes rather than actually sort of putting something in place that will last and be sort of robust enough to last the test of time. And it's incredible to me that businesses will have a marketing strategy. They'll have a financial strategy. They'll have a business strategy. They'll have a business plan. They'll have a marketing plan. They don't have a well-being plan. They have a HR plan, and I would argue HR and well-being sit slightly aside to each other because it's not fair HR for HR to be all things to all men. It just can't happen. So there's no sort of thing there. And the other bit is that they'll businesses turn around. They say, okay, look, we need to do X. I've got someone who's really interested in that on staff. I'm going to send them out to find out everything they can about it and then come back. Okay. Now what? And then the person comes back and they're like, oh, I've got all these great ideas. And it's like, brilliant. Okay, how are we going to put them into place? Well, I don't know. I'm not a well-being expert. You just sent me off to look at X, Y, and Z and, all this kind of stuff. So, it's always a really interesting thing to me how this splits down into the sort of the stuff that you would assume is relatively straightforward. So let's get a strategy, a plan, a budget, work it out, work it forward. How does it work? Who's the best people to come in and do these kind of things? But actually, it's hardly done. What happens is it's the other way round. So someone will go, oh, I saw somebody do a really great thing on mindfulness the other day. Can we get them in? Well, yeah, sure, we can get them in. Get them in. They're absolutely brilliant. They do a marvelous job. Our staff are really chuffed. And they've had an afternoon doing mindfulness. But that's it. That's where it stops. The other sort of side of it is initiatives put a lot of the emphasis on the employee, whereas strategy puts a lot of the emphasis on the business. So the business has to create the strategy with help or without help or whatever it might be, and then plug the initiatives into it. The initiatives are the things that you roll out to the employees and say, okay, gang, we've decided you're going to be doing this, 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 and this. But what we shouldn't be doing is just throwing a whole load of initiatives at people and saying, right, that's our responsibility over. We bought you an ice cream, we gave you some fish and chips, we've made sure that you can sort of do the lotus position. And next week we're going to do you a full course on burnout. And that's it. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. So, yes, for me, it's massively important that businesses understand they hold the key. They are the business. They're the employers. They're the people that set the culture within which everybody else works. And if that culture isn't right, and if that culture doesn't work, it doesn't matter how much of this other stuff you do. People will always be going, you know what? That company over there, they treat us like dirt. They gave us a mindfulness course,
Yeah.
but that's and then
It's behind it.
and there you go.
I think it's fair to say as well, like I really enjoy the challenge of the contact center environment in terms of how it works and how it operates and the diversity of workplaces that you have out there. And the fact that you can have so many people remote working as hybrid working and fully on site. And that creates a massive challenge for a lot of businesses now, especially more now than ever, in that you've got people who are out of sight who are potentially struggling, where the business would potentially find it hard because you're not looking across the desk at those people anymore. And that's one of the beauties of why I enjoy working at TMAC is that's an initiative we're working on at the moment with one organisation is to identify high stress environments, high stress calls, high stress situations that their advisors are being put under, and can we identify, well-being and welfare issues that we can signal to the business to give them a hand with that process. I think it's you've seen the technology yourself. What's your thoughts on technology supporting that in general?
I think I think you use a key word in support. So
Mm.
for me, part of the problem we have with remote working and things like that is we remove the human interaction from the scenario. Now, again, we're talking a very broad brushstrokes here because there are some people who are more than happy with all human interaction being removed from the board. But in my experience in sort of supporting people with large teams in different places, what I've found, and I think I've mentioned it to yourself, is that the only interactions they do get with other people, especially within the business, are business interactions. So what you're getting is, hey, how are you doing on your targets? What have you done today? How have you done this? Da, da, da. So the only conversation they have with the business is based on business. And immediately you start to lose them because, they kind of sit there and they're like, well, you don't care about me. All you care about is that I hit target and you hit revenue. End of story.
Yeah.
So in a couple of companies, what I made sure of was that, they were having sort of random, kind of like sort of a random networking where people registered. And for 1 hour on a Tuesday, all these random names got thrown in the hat. And the one thing you weren't allowed to talk about was work. And effectively, all these people could talk to somebody else who was working from home, and it wasn't to do with work. And then if you wanted to maintain that contact, you could. If you wanted to find something else, you could. And actually, what it also did was built up all these wonderful sort of lines over all these different elements of the business. So you had somebody sort of in inbound talking to somebody who was sort of researching, or somebody who was in sort of the IT department was talking to outbound. And
Yeah.
these people wouldn't normally have ever crossed paths, even though they were in the same organization. But because, they were able to do this. And that's the type of thing where I think the use of technology becomes really important. It's that whole sort of, for me, it doesn't take away from having that conversation with that trained professional, whatever the case might be, but it gives us that opportunity to reach out, do different things, be part of different things, talk to different places all over the world, and find out all this really, really great stuff that's going on. And again, just the idea of looking out for cues in conversations and things. If you can free up person hours by taking away, it was really, I had a conversation with an AI expert from Portugal a couple of weeks ago, and he was basically saying the purpose of AI is not to replace man or woman or whatever the case might be. Purpose is to take away the monotonous, time-consuming junk to allow those with the training and the knowledge to be able to better implement that within their business. So if I can free up somebody by sort of having a look out for certain bits and bobs, so people aren't monitoring their calls so much, or they're not having to spend, hours and hours trawling through all these different things, they can get on with something else. But I do sort of sound the horn of caution that, we have to be mindful of how this plays out, because the last thing we want to do, and something that I've always found uh, I don't actually understand why it happens. I think it happens because it's just the way it's always been done. But, for example, again, I think we were talking previously about, if something picks something up, the first reaction is to push somebody through coaching. So if we find a representative who isn't quite, or it's the numbers aren't there, or we're hearing in his calls that something's going wrong, the first thing we do is push them through coaching. Now, I would argue that's counterproductive, without actually first trying to see if there's something more going on.
Mm.
Because again, we go back to the how much does my company value me? If I'm being picked up because something's gone wrong, but actually at home all these things are happening, but the first interaction I have with my management team or whatever else is to sit down and go, right, we noticed your calls weren't very good, so we're going to go through how to make a good call again. And you're like, but I've been here for 5 years, or whatever the case might. I know how to make a good call. It's
Yeah.
just the fact that this is going on. So for me, it's that sort of, I embrace it wholeheartedly, but with the caveat that, we've got to be looking for the right things in the right way and then having the right paths to take people down
Yeah,
when we find what we've got. So for me, technology and things like that are an identification tool,
absolutely.
and a way of sort of reducing the unnecessary clutter so that people can actually go in with a much closer focus and say, okay, look, we've got the stats, we've got the numbers, we've got the figures. There are programs in my world that, survey staff and go through and ask them hundreds of questions and whatever the case might be. Well, A, you've got to hope they answer them all honestly, or else, you're in a bit of a trouble. But B, they can't actually then spew out a company specific because they don't understand the culture in the company. They can't get in there on the ground, talk
Yeah,
to the tea lady, talk to the CEO, and in my opinion, talk to the secretary. Because if you want to know anyone that knows anything that's going on in the business, it's the woman or man who sat at reception during the secretarial work. So they can't do that. But what they can give you is an insight into some places you could and should be looking. And that for me is where I think you guys and what you're doing at TMAC and everything else, that's the beauty of what it is. The fact that it can help someone like me to better focus my time, my efforts, and my energies into the right people in the right way at the right time, rather than me having to come in, spend 4 days going through all this stuff. And I actually only get to do what it is you're really paying me to do, well, for 1 day, which of course is a Friday, and you're buying me ice cream that day. So
yeah, exactly that. Exactly that. Craig, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. We've gone just past the half-hour mark, so um, it's always a fascinating conversation. And guys, anybody who's watching this who wants to reach out to Craig to find out a little bit more, please do. Obviously, he's registered as a speaker on the event, so you can just click through his image on the event, and you'll get his contact details on there. Um, Please feel free. Ask any questions in the comments. It's been a live show. I noticed nobody's really asked any questions on the show, but that's all cool. The video stays live. If you want to ask any questions afterwards, me and Craig will both be watching the comments. We'll be happy to respond to anything that we're comfortable to. And if you want to put it in a DM, absolutely feel free to connect and send us a DM as well. Craig, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today, and hopefully it's opened a few eyes for people that are watching this and giving people a little bit of direction as to where they need to go with things. But have you got any last words that you'd like to
I
suggest?
think the last words for me are sort of, the more we talk, the more we understand. And, not everyone can be an expert in everything. In fact, no one's ever an expert in everything. So, in the same way that you wouldn't, or I wouldn't expect to make my own phone calls or do my own sort of thing from that point of view. I think reach out to somebody in the well-being world. We're not scary. We're not here to sort of bamboozle you with sort of stuff. Most of us are quite happy just to give advice and sort of have a chat from there. But from my point of view, I'm always at the end of a DM on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to continue the conversation. So if anything's popped up, and even stuff you don't agree with, at the end of the day, people will have listened to what I've had to say and just go, "Oh, they're an absolute load of that." Absolutely fine. Believe it or not, it happens to me more often than I'd like. Um, but that doesn't mean that we can't have a conversation. And that doesn't mean that we can't share different opinions, but actually still talk around the subject. So please, reach out, have a chat, anything you want to go through. I am on the DM. Thanks, Paul. I'd love to.
No problem at all. Thanks, Craig. Been great to chat.
Cheers,
I'll
pal.
see you all next week, next Thursday at 3 p.m.